We can be under authority, in which case we set aside our own judgment and behave, at least outwardly, in a way that conforms to the authority. This may receive all sorts of rewards, in that we're an acceptable part of a fellowship group, and we receive the fellowship accordingly. And may, of course, also relieve us of making difficult decisions, trying to work out what's right and what's wrong. But you can't progress spiritually in this situation. You can be happier because you have the fellowship, say, and the support of the group. You're conforming. But in a sense, you're always at risk of, at heart, because you want to do something other than what you're being constrained to do. In a sense, you're not a reliable member, not really, although they don't know it perhaps. And you don't have a long-run future with this group, because in the end you will long to do what you truly wish to do, because that's where your values are. Unless, of course, conforming to the group long enough changes your values. I think I could almost say that outwardly, yes, you do change your values, but you lose your creative sparkle, your ability to live, to create, you lose it. Because you are living unwillingly in a certain way in order to buy the support of that group. The extreme case is the man who's running a concentration camp that he doesn't agree with, because if he doesn't, he loses his privileges with the regime, and say his family and so on suffer accordingly. Now that's a sort of nightmare situation. And I suppose very clearly we want to find ways of avoiding it wherever possible. But that is the extreme case, and fortunately not something that faces most of us most of the time. But the minor situation might be insidious and really troublesome in the long run. That minor situation being where you are constrained to live contrary to your values indefinitely. You start to build up a grudge and a distaste for the situation you feel constrained to remain in. And I think this will seep into your relationship with it and the people accordingly that are part of it. It may have a depressing effect on your general well-being. So I think I would say that it seems better to avoid such situations where you can. And by where you can, I mean you'll take into account the cost of avoiding it, the losses of, say, fellowship, the support of that group. in a sort of courageous attempt to live life your way and find out accordingly. And if living it that way that it leads you to changes your values because you find it's not as successful and happy as it's got all sorts of problems associated with it, then you'll adjust your values, who you are, and live according to the new adjustment. And in my view, that's the basic opportunity of being here in this universe. That we're not constrained by the reality of God. We're a freer at least agent. To be what we want to be within the circumstances course of the life that we find we're in, and to find out what the consequences are. There may be consequences of not belonging to some group that's not right for us. But the real gains may make it worthwhile. To go your own way. In other words, tend to be a person that can't be bought. I'm not sure whether this is the best thing or actually being reckless. And it will depend on what the costs are of such a strategy. I mean, in very tight communities, to try and not be part of that community, they stone you to death. And to just slip away in the night might be such a horrendous cost of massive change that you're just not going to do it. So you stay in conformity and suppression indefinitely. An alternative sort of in-between strategy is that you become low profile. You don't outwardly disagree, you just apparently conform, but your heart's not in this conformity. So you live in your own way as regards any slack there is in the system to so do. This may be seen as the best compromise. You know, these sort of extreme cases, that the sort of biblical thing where the king is insist you worship him, so outwardly you do worship him, but inwardly, well, your heart's not remotely in it. You follow your God wherever you can, whilst still meeting the official ways of acting that are being pressed upon you. And pragmatically, that might be the best strategy. In a sense, holding yourself ever in readiness to God to find you a way out that's not too horrendously costly. You know, you can be in a society, but such a low-profile person that's not causing waves that you can just be ignored and largely living life the way you want to, but within the constraints of that which is outwardly demanded of you. It may be the best strategy to go against, to try and exit from the community, might have a death penalty with it, or imprisonment, or extremely deprived circumstances as a consequence put upon you. I suppose then I'm saying that you conform until you find you have a better option, taking into account the probable costs and benefits of such. At any stage you could take your freedom, accepting the costs, which may be unknown, of course, or at least probabilistic, uncertain. Or you can stay and compromise, and that in itself may be good training. How to best abide in circumstances that are not ideal from your point of view. We could say that it's some measure of maturity to be able to do this. Certainly rather than take alternative actions that can be horrendous. In some sense, the prodigal, you see, took off, took the high-risk strategy, but it paid off at some shorter-run cost, of course, but in the long run, it actually changed his values such that they shifted to an alignment with what he would have what he rejected in the first place, namely his dad's home and so on. So going off was a blessing, whereas his brother who'd stayed seemed to be a bit less successful in his strategy. Not sure. What do you think?